Welcome everyone. This is Sairam Vedam on behalf of Gallop Solutions, welcoming all to the webinar on mobile application testing in Agile environment in conjunction with our esteemed partner Xamarin. Let me take a moment to introduce Gallop at first. Gallop Solutions is a 10-year-old US-based co-located independent software testing services and specialist QA staffing services company. With offices in Philadelphia and California, the Gallop services are backed by proprietary testing IP, enterprise test acceleration suite, resulting in enhanced productivity. Complemented by strong in-house testing R&D teams, we have been championing the cause of software quality and resulting in substantial market acceleration and optimal return on investments for some of the best-known names in the enterprise segment and independent software vendors. Over the last decade, we have been championing the cause of software quality with our commitment to ensuring we share our thoughts on software testing thought leadership. Today's webinar, I think, cannot happen more better than at this apt time when digital disruption is sweeping through enterprises and ISVs. Mobility is a strategic sticky factor for business success. Today, I have Xamarin partners on the forum. Xamarin believes there is no better way, a much better way to build mobile apps, and Gallop believes there is always a better way to ensure software quality. With that said, I would also like to introduce today's speakers for the day. I have Anant Vinnakota. Anant is a mobile test evangelist and expert from Gallop, a management grad from California State University. Anant is an expert strategist in both business technology and kind of orchestrating enterprise mobility applications, both from architecture and test implementation standpoint. He's had diverse experience in terms of business incubations of mobile products integrated both with cloud and big data. Anant would share his insights on the whole webinar from a mobile application testing. Without delay, I am also excited to have Zach Sienski, partner manager at Xamarin. Zach ensures Gallop is always ahead of the mobile testing curve while we get to work with Xamarin. And today, Zach will ensure he covers how Xamarin TestCloud is differentiated from other mobile testing applications and options, and how Xamarin can actually help you automate your mobile application testing across 1,000+ physical devices. Let me not take any more time welcoming Anant onto the table. Let's have an engaging technical discussion. Anant, over to you.
Thank you so much, Sai. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Myself, Anand, and Zach from Xamarin will present to you a couple of cases, concepts, and tools that will help you make your mobile app sticky. So here is what we'll cover today. First, we'll go over a few mobile device statistics for beginners, and then we're going to give you a few examples of performance and usability failures in banking, online communications, and airline apps. And then we'll take a look at why these rich folks failed in doing a great job, and then how that can be fixed. Then we will be handing it over to Zach, who will walk us through the mobile test cloud that will help you test better. So before I jump into the subject, I'd like to set some context here. I don't want to start explaining to you that mobile is important in today's business, because I'm pretty sure you're very smart enough to know that, and is one of the primary reasons why you're here today. But anyway, for beginners, there are 7.7 billion mobile devices today in the market, but only 7.1 billion people on the planet, and more than 2 million apps for iOS and Android put together. So what does that mean to you? Before that, what does it mean to the user? So it means a lot of options to the user. And what does it mean to you? It means that you do not have any option but to make a first-rate impression. And so, having said that, almost every industry has realized the fact, and one of the top ones to prioritize mobile in their business is airlines, social, retail, and banking. So we'll take a look at them. First, starting with the banking apps. So here is a chart of the top bankers in North America region, and then their app ratings. Not many of them have done a great job, or even a good job, but we took a look at their features, their App Store reviews, and then decided to pick one of the very crucial modules and how their reviews are run for that. So we were talking about the remote check deposit then. So remote check deposit is a feature in which users can snap check images and deposit into their bank accounts. But then for such a crucial feature, banks have gained a very negative feedback. Well, it is very expected when there is no proper test coverage for two widely fluctuating system integrations. So on one side, we have these mobile devices with high camera capabilities and image sensing capabilities, and on the other side, we have banking legacy systems and transaction processing systems that need to be integrated. Now, integrating these two things is one thing, and inputs to them is another thing. So, inputs to these two highly integrated systems is widely fluctuating financial deposit documents, numerous financial deposit documents. Like you've got international checks, then you've got domestic checks, money orders, Western unions, food and food coupons and whatnot, and then there's a lot of scope for fraud where you can deposit images of valid check. So you have to take all these inputs into consideration and then put them into two highly fluctuating technical machines. So when there is insufficient test coverage for this integration across devices and operating systems, it will lead to a disastrous result, which I think is what most of the banks have experienced based on App Store reviews. And now let's talk about Skype. Now we all know Skype. I mean, we all use Skype. Hundreds of millions of people do. But Skype has secured negative feedback on message sync up across devices and platforms, and poor usability for calling. And practically, they are the ones who started video calling, right, in the market. And then today they are surviving because of the market share they have. But frankly speaking, users would move if they had option to move. That's what the store reviews say, at least. Now, what could have caused this? So a couple of things that are common across all these approaches is very short release cycles. Now, short release cycles is good. I mean, that is one of our core focuses today, development and testing in Agile. But when you are planning to work in that mode, it is also important to have a foolproof plan and a strategy to release. And yeah, remember, users have a lot of options, and they take not more than 3 seconds to make a decision on the app. If you look at Skype's release cycles, it's just like September 4th, 22nd, 15th, 30th, 24th, 4th Jan, Feb 9th, and March 9th. It's very short. And then they evidently did not have a good device coverage for testing at least the message sync up functionality and calling functionality. Okay, after all this, you may ask, we know all that, but what's important to consider while testing an app? So customers judge the app based on 3 things. Usability of the app, number 1. Performance of the critical functionality of the app, number 2. And then the ongoing support that you as a company would give to your customers in addressing their feedback on the App Store. That's number 3. That's very important. And recent surveys that we have conducted shows us that 60% of the users look for usability and 25% of them for performance. That itself put together is 85% of the market. Now, performance and usability. So what are the common reasons of failure in these 2 things? So poor performance of apps can be attributed to a lack of strategy, to testing application architecture with heavy backend integrations. Doing everything in a sandbox doesn't prepare you for the real world challenges, does it? So performance of the application should be tested in real world across real devices and OSs, and screen resolutions, of course. And usability. One most important thing about usability is that a design that works for one industry may not work for other industries. So let's say you encountered a beautiful app and then you want to create an exactly same thing for your company. You'll have to make sure that that design works for your industry. So plainly copying a beautiful app will not get us anywhere. So failing to have an overall strategy with methods and proper tools to tie together performance and usability testing will be a death on the App Store if we fail to do that. So how can all this be fixed? I mean, there are a couple of things that if we keep in mind can do a better job for us. One is striking a fine balance between performance and design. So too much of focus on performance is not good, and too much of focus on design can kill that too. So you need to be able to strike a fine balance between them. In mobile world, customer is central focus to the strategy, and functional performance takes highest precedence over everything. At the same time, mobile users are tough to please on designs, but decent creativity targets will work than trying to be extremely creative. Second thing is shift left and automate. All of you must be familiar with the shift left implementation nowadays, where you also plan testing prior to or in parallel with development. Now, It is proven that testing after development will result in time loss for fixing the bugs and may result in delaying the releases by weeks and sometimes even months. So implementing shift left strategy will help you design the app, conduct usability testing with prototypes to understand the bumpy flows and the critical flows, and then define performances to it. So there you are. There you are combining the design and performance. You can see the change, right? And then testing on real world devices. This is very crucial. As we already explained, everything testing done on sandbox will not prepare you for real world. So testing in labs is only an educated guess and cannot ensure complete customer mimicking the complete customer behavior. Companies should know their customers prior to designing or even baselining the performance, which can be done only through analytics or market research. So companies should first invest on trying to know their customer even before getting to the design. So that's very crucial that should be kept in mind. And then automated functional test collaboration tools. So having methods is one thing, having people is another thing, and having the right tools to bring everything together is another thing. So having the right functional test collaboration tools is the responsibility of a test manager, and he should be able to facilitate development and testing teams to engage in a continuous improvement model for them to be able to serve the customer better on App Store. So you take the feedback from App Store, and you should be operating in a fast release model, and then there you should enable your developers and testers with the right tools. So the right tools will help you automate, test, record, and retest and analyze the results, so that more time is spent on analyzing the bugs and fixing them versus just identifying them. So manual can get you only to a certain point, and beyond that, you need to know when to automate. So like every problem has a solution, and every solution has a challenge. So the solution that we talked about here has a few challenges too, very obvious ones and very critical ones. One is that when we say you need to be testing on real-world devices all the while, and that's the ultimate test, it calls in for procuring real devices. And there are more than, I don't even know, 150 plus or even more than that devices today in the market with numerous screen resolutions. So a company cannot plan to buy 150 real devices, and it cannot have people test on all of them and at the same time manage all of them. So this is all going to take cost. Procuring is only half the game, right? Second half comes in where you need to operate the devices. And as long as you deploy mobile devices within the organization, you're talking about your data security, and then you're talking about handling those devices and loading applications onto them, upgrading them, and clearing the caches and whatnot, and preparing them for tests. So it calls in for more cost and more operation setup for deploying devices. And third thing is very obvious. When we say that you need to automate using right tools and right expertise, you'll have to incur a considerable cost for acquiring that automation skills and the tools that let you do that. And that can so that has proven to be an expensive deal nowadays, except a few tools that are emerging in today's market, which are just right for you, and then they'll help you get the job done. Which is where we want to hand over to Zach, who will talk to you about the mobile TestCloud that will enable you to test the app using by connecting to their remote device setup and test on multiple devices within few clicks.
Right. Thanks, Anand, for an insightful journey so far. Before handing over to Zach, let me take pride in introducing Xamarin. Xamarin is a mobile application development and testing tool company to deliver great mobile applications. Founded in May 2011, Xamarin has offices in San Francisco, Boston, Buenos Aires, and London. Over 900,000 developers and 20,000 customers use Xamarin to build, test, and monitor fully native mobile applications for iOS, Android, Mac, and Windows. Xamarin, as we speak, is redefining cross-platform mobile application development and testing by unifying fully native application development in a single C#-based platform. Gallop is proud to share the fact that we partner with Xamarin's TestCloud and leverage the TestCloud to automate application testing on hundreds of real devices in the cloud. Without delaying any further, let me welcome Zach. Zach, over to you.
Thanks, guys. Awesome job. So you should be able to see my screen, and I wanted to take some time to introduce Xamarin and then get really into Xamarin TestCloud and what you can expect in Xamarin TestCloud. So here at Xamarin, we are a complete mobile solution. Using our platform, you can develop native mobile applications across iOS, Android, Windows Phone. Then using Xamarin TestCloud, which we're focused on today, test those applications across 1,500 physical devices in our device lab in Denmark. And then finally, using Xamarin Insights, you can run analytics into your application post-launch so that you're able to see what your users are doing. But let's get into Xamarin TestCloud. So Xamarin TestCloud, we really like to think of it as actually two separate products within Xamarin TestCloud. The first is Xamarin UI Tests. So we've made it very easy for you to write very simple test scripts in order to replicate what your users are doing across your applications. This is very powerful because you can use C# to write very simple test scripts in order to test locally to make sure that your devices or that your test scripts are running correctly. Then you will take your test scripts and seamlessly upload them to Xamarin TestCloud so that you can test across 1,500 plus physical devices in our device lab. These are physical devices, as I mentioned, and as Anant just mentioned in his previous section, it's very important to test across physical devices as opposed to emulators or just even locally, as physical devices really give you the feedback that you need when you are testing your application. So in the Xamarin TestCloud, we'll get into that in a second, but what you're able to do is really run analytics to see how your application is performing and then see various screenshots along the way of every single test so that you can see from the UI layer down through your application where your application is succeeding and which devices it's failing on. One important thing to note about Xamarin TestCloud is that you're able to test any application on Xamarin TestCloud. It can be written in Objective-C, Java, written in Xamarin, or even a hybrid application. You can test all of these applications through Xamarin TestCloud. And then finally, before we get into what Xamarin TestCloud looks like, it's important to note what you can write actually in these test scripts. So you can write behaviors that your users are doing every day. Tap, scroll, swipe, pinch. And actually my personal favorite is text entry. And if you think of how long your manual testers or even you spend tapping each specific key while you're typing out a username, maybe an email address while you're testing your mobile application, text entry allows you to seamlessly automate this so that you don't have to go into all 80 devices and tap out each letter, as opposed to now you can just enter an email address or a password very easily. So let's get into Xamarin TestCloud. What does this actually look like? Well, the first thing you'll see when you log into Xamarin TestCloud is this dashboard. So you can see here that we've segmented our teams into various applications. So we can see the mobile CRM application, the mobile CRM team. That's segmented by a few different devices. So we have Android and iOS below that. And you can see here that we're actually segmenting it out by team. And these apps can all be, as I mentioned before, written on any platform. Xamarin using C# or Objective-C, Swift, Java, hybrid version of these apps. And this is the first thing that you'll see when going into Xamarin. As you move through Xamarin TestCloud, you'll see here the next screen. And this really allows you to get a historical view of all the tests that you've run in Xamarin TestCloud. So you can see here the countless tests that we've run starting back January 15th, 2015, all the way up to February 6th. And you can jump into any of these tests so that you can see just how your app is progressing over time and making sure that your tests back in January 15 are actually improving over the course of time so that hopefully by February 6th your app is improving. You can also see up at the top here the number of tests that we've run, as well as the app download size, peak memory usage. These are all important pieces of data that you would not be able to receive if you were just doing physical testing, manual testing. So before we get into what a test actually looks like, this is the dashboard of a particular test. So if we jump into a test, we see here that we had 2 out of 2 devices, or 2 out of 2 of our tests failed, but only 9 of our 90 devices failed. So what's great about Xamarin TestCloud is you're able to see the failures by certain categories. So if we look over on the bottom left side, we see that the Android 4.0.3 version and 4.0.4 version failed the most. And so this might be an operating system failure. And if we look over at manufacturer, we see that the Amazon devices failed, both of those, as opposed to the other devices, the HTC was clean. So this may be a form factor issue. This also might be an operating system issue. So as we see here, this really allows you to get granular in terms of what devices are failing, and you don't even have to run into the test scripts yet. You just see what is going on with each particular test. So what does an actual test look like? Well, as we see here, this is us jumping into one of our test scripts. And you'll see on the left, the section that's highlighted is the test scripts that we're running, the test steps. And each certain test step, we take a screenshot after each test step so that you're able to see your application running across, I think we tested 90 devices in this particular test. You can only see 15 here. But as we scroll through this test, you'll see that the screens are changing. And this is very powerful because not only does your tester need to be looking at this, but your UI person can also start reviewing these tests and make sure that the UI is clean off of all of these devices. So while a test may not fail, and we'll get into this in a little bit, the UI may not render correctly on certain form factors, which is very important. I'm continue scrolling through these test scripts, and you'll notice that the screen keeps changing. And it's very cool to see the different form factors are rendering the app differently, but it still looks and feels like the application across all of these devices. And that's because this is a native application that's been written. And we continue to scroll through these tests, have a nice little DocuSign right there. And so this is what I was talking about, is that you can visually compare all of the various applications or all the various tests across these devices. So we see here that the Samsung, this very small form factor, isn't rendering correctly. So we can actually take this may not fail as a test step in our test scripts, but our UI person can go to our developer and say, hey, for certain devices, we need to make sure that for small form factors, this application will run well. Similarly, on the bottom right, you see that these large form factors, the tablets, have a lot of blank space underneath these graphs. And this just visually doesn't look great. We could expand this graph to take up the entire page. While this may not come across as a failure in our test steps, we actually do want to take this to our engineer to make sure that this renders correctly across large form factors like tablets. What's really cool about Xamarin TestCloud is you can actually get very granular into each specific device as well. And something that you're not able to do in manual testing is the ability to look into the memory usage of each application across each device, as well as the CPU usage. And this is important because as we start to think about what is causing an app to crash, while it's important to go through manual testing, and we're definitely not trying to replace all of manual testing, a lot of it is things that we can't see underneath the application. We just know that following the certain parameters of these steps, we're coming across a failure. Well, this allows us to see how our application is actually being rendered across all of these devices and which devices it's using too much memory and too much CPU usage. You can then log into either the console log or get a stack trace of these failures. So if we look really closely here, we see that we're out of memory for this particular step, and that's what caused the app to crash. This is very important, as I just mentioned, because you want to know what exactly is causing the app to crash, as opposed to just knowing that it crashes after a certain amount of test steps. And then finally, you can really drill into what specific device you're testing on. So you can do this across all of the devices that you're testing on, making sure you know the dimensions, the processor, the display, and obviously the operating system. As most of the time, or I shouldn't say most of the time, but some of the time the errors that you come across are operating system specific as opposed to form factor. So what makes Xamarin TestCloud different as opposed to some of the other alternatives out there? Well, first and foremost, it's just the sheer size of our device lab in Denmark. We now have over 1,500 devices, and you'll see here that this screenshot was captured maybe 3 weeks ago, and we had 1,369 devices. If you go to this site now, it's over 1,500, which is pretty phenomenal growth, and we're continuing to grow out the device lab. We're really helping with the device fragmentation issue that's out there. And if you're trying to test across multiple devices and have your own device lab set up, the sheer cost of purchasing and maintaining all of these devices is pretty incomprehensible. Second, we use automated testing for Xamarin TestCloud, which means that as soon as you're finished writing your test scripts, test them locally and make sure that they perform well across a local physical device or maybe an emulator. And as you upload them to Xamarin TestCloud, we will automate your testing across all of the devices that you select at once. So if you select 3 devices or you select 80 devices, those tests will run at once and will give you a nice dashboard, a nice snapshot as to what happened during that test. As opposed to device remoting, where you go from device to device to device and can take up much more time. This allows you to seamlessly upload your test to TestCloud and see your results in a few minutes. And then finally, what's really cool, and we've actually patented this view model on the right. And what I mean by that is, if you look at some of the alternatives out there, you can go screen by screen or device by device and see what's happening from a UI standpoint. But with Xamarin TestCloud, you can look at all 90, maybe 100, or even just 25 devices that you've tested on at once. And this is very powerful, as I mentioned before, because your UI person, maybe your designer wants to take a look at how the device or how the application is rendering across all of these devices. Well, as opposed to having to go through each step on one device, then moving on to the next device, you can go through all of these steps with a zoomed out version and make sure just visually that the application is working. And then your developers and your testers can drill into what's really happening on some of these errors. So it's a really cool layout that we have, and it's just beautiful and compared to some of the other alternatives out there. And these are physical devices that we're taking screenshots on. So just to recap, we have over 170 device models, 33 operating system versions, and this continues to just keep growing. You can use Calabash or Xamarin.UI Tests to write very simple scripts, so you don't have to be a developer by any means to write test scripts for Xamarin TestCloud. We've made it very easy to use C#, Calabash, and Ruby in order to write these tests. From a reporting standpoint, you get great snapshots and great data into your CPU usage, into your memory usage, or even just how many devices failed, what operating system versions are failing. And then finally, from object-based scripting, this is very important. When we're writing our test scripts using Xamarin.UI Test or using Ruby and Calabash, we're actually calling elements on the screen. So if your developer wants to take a login button and move that to the top, that won't affect any of our tests. Rather, our tests will continue to run as seamlessly as they would before. Anything that's on the screen is what we're calling as an element. In some of the other alternatives, you actually specify a certain landing page on the screen itself, which is the login button. And if your designer or developer moves that login button, you have to rewrite your entire test suite from scratch, which can be pretty tedious, especially if you're changing your app around a lot. So just to sum up, Xamarin, we here are a complete mobile solution platform, Xamarin TestCloud, Xamarin Insights, and partnering with Gallop and Xamarin TestCloud makes it a great experience to test your application across 1,500 now physical devices. Turn it back over to Gallop, and we can wrap this up.
Thanks, Zach. I think that was very, very insightful. Looks like we have abundant set of questions that are coming our way. I think let's do this way. I will kind of read out the question that our users are asking and the audience. Depending on the nature of the question, I would have Anant or Zach choose, or both of you can take turns to answer. So one, Naresh, the first question that we have today is there any difference between browser stack and Xamarin TestCloud? Question is coming from Naresh Penchala. Zach, would you mind taking a shot at this question?
Sure. By browser-based versus Xamarin TestCloud, could you sort of drill into what you mean by that?
The question is, there's a tool called Browser Stack, if I'm not wrong. So the question is, what's the difference between Browser Stack and Xamarin TestCloud?
I'm actually not familiar with Browser Stack. Actually, do you guys have you guys heard of them?
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
Anant has. So no worries, Zach. I think Anant is.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so Browser Stack is this tool that gives you flexibility to switch between the browser sizes on the desktop itself. So on one side, Xamarin Cloud is Naresh is a physical device sitting somewhere in the lab, and you having an access to its screen. Versus Browser Stack is a tool that you would log into from your web browser and operate different browser sizes on it. So there is a difference. So Browser Stack is still a browser testing on a desktop. It's not a physical device testing. So you must have tried just operating the size of your browser, right? I mean, changing the size of your browser from small to big, and the orientation changes for responsive websites. So that is different versus you opening the same website on an iPhone, on an Android, on an on a Windows. So that's the difference you're talking about. So Xamarin has plugged in their mobile devices in the cloud, and then it's giving access to you to launch that website. Versus Browser Stack is still your desktop and launching that link on different browser sizes. That's it.
It's more of a cross-browser testing.
It's more of a cross-browser
right?
testing, exactly.
Yeah, and something that I'd mention too, and just throw in there, is that Xamarin TestCloud is really focused on testing your mobile application, and it sounds like Browser Stack or Browser Stack is focused on testing various responsive websites, and that's not really what we're focused on. We're testing mobile applications that you want to see how your application is being uploaded and performing on all of these devices.
Sure. I think the next one seems to be coming from John Burtons. For usage on the Xamarin TestCloud, do the apps have to be instrumented? That's number one. The second question on continuing to that would be, do test hooks have to be created? I think there are a bunch of questions, so let's take this two, and then I will come back to a couple of other questions by John. So to repeat, for usage on Xamarin TestCloud, do the apps have necessarily to be instrumented, and do we require test hooks to be created?
Yeah, it's a good question. From the Android side, it's actually very seamless, very simple, and it is from the iOS side as well. From the Android side, you just pull down the APK, whether that's on the Google Play Store or you have it internally, and you're able to write test scripts across this application, then upload the application with those test scripts, select the devices that you want, have a device key as you upload this to Xamarin TestCloud. So there's no application instrumentation there. On the iOS side, it's not as simple, but it is essentially running the exact same application that you'd be running in the iTunes App Store. Your second question of test hooks, don't believe we need to write test hooks into any of these applications. These will be the applications that are running in the Google Play Store and in the iTunes App Store to make it as real as possible.
Right. I believe that's where the link-up question was by John, who's asking, can production builds will go to the App Store be tested, and do we have the necessity of linking the libraries? So that's a continuum on that one.
Yeah, so essentially from the Android side, absolutely, and then iOS, yes, it's just going to take a little bit more in terms of putting a few lines of code within that application in order to upload it to Xamarin TestCloud. But essentially, it's the exact same application that you'd be running in the app stores.
Sure. Looks like there are a few more questions, which makes this very interesting, I must say. For Xamarin, will there be a support for accessibility ID of iOS and content description of Android in the near future?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
From a Xamarin standpoint, the question that's coming across is, will there be support for accessibility ID in case of iOS and content description in case of Android? So they're asking, is there a support for these two? One from an iOS standpoint, another from Android standpoint.
It's a good question. I don't really understand what the support, what type of support exactly from an IDE standpoint.
Yeah, accessibility ID from an iOS and content description. That's fine. I think we could. So Yeah, I think it's more from a feature standpoint. Looks like the question is from Monique.
So essentially taking your IDE from maybe iOS and being able to write tests in Objective-C, is that sort of the question?
Yeah, looks like maybe it's para-descriptive, so we could park it back and we could reach out to Monique to understand what it's exactly meaning. We'll probably
Yeah.
park it for now, Zach. We'll have another question which is coming up. So currently in Xamarin, the question is, where does the app data actually get stored?
So we have, it's stored in the cloud. Our device lab is in Denmark, and so as you're uploading, you can access that data yourself in the sort of the cloud in Denmark. So you're accessing your own data. Each device that you're running your application on, every test that gets run on these devices, the devices get wiped after every single test and are reset to factory settings. So that's something that I actually didn't mention. It's very important though. You'll never have any issues with uploading someone else's test or seeing someone else's application on your device. These will always be your applications that you're uploading because we reset all of these devices to factory settings after a test has been completed.
Sure. There are a few more questions. Looks like let me kind of take this one. So as we speak, the questions are getting populated. I would appreciate the users to be audience to be patient, and we are getting back on the questions. Is testing on the Xamarin TestCloud and actual mobile device is very similar? That's something that Pallavi is trying to check with us.
Yeah, Pallavi.
Yeah.
So testing on Xamarin TestCloud and mobile devices, they're not similar, they are the same. So Xamarin is giving you remote access to physical devices sitting in their data centers. So testing on a device that's sitting in your hand versus a device that is sitting in a data center with a remote access is the same thing.
Okay, that's good. So let's see. There's a question from a product owner of a mobile banking application. He's actually asking, how do I choose the list of devices for testing? Do you have something to comment on that, Anand?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, that's something that comes up from almost every single company before they are starting their mobile initiative. So the best way to know what devices you should be testing on is to first be investing on your customers. So that is done only through analytics, if that is already done using your web application or something, or to be investing on market research. So there should be a starting point, right? So if you have not invested in analytics at all, then probably you'll have to fall back on companies' researchers, or you have to be doing a survey yourself or Gartner research to tell you which are the most used devices, number one. And let's say you cross that stage and you have done a first launch. So while doing the first launch itself, you will have to build analytics into your apps, not just to understand what devices and what OSs are being used, but also to understand the functionality that is most being used. So we call it events. So in fact, even Facebook does one such thing. They call it Facebook Insights, where they give you code snippets that you place all through your application. That will determine. So that's gonna recognize wherever you go. So and then it'll make a analytics out of it. So when you run one single report, you'll understand out of your 1 million user base, how many of them have gone in case of banking app. So it will tell you how many people have logged in, checked the account balance, and then it will tell you how many people have checked the account balance, made a minimum payment, or they have checked their account balance and then gone to a reward section. So it's going to give you analytics around this, based on which you'll understand which is the most used functionality, what are the most used devices, what are the most used OSs, and whatnot. And I think that will be a good starting point for you.
Great. So how do you actually know when to automate your test suite?
So automating, when to automate is a tricky question and a very good question also. So your app is, as per me, always ready to automate, and you should just know when. Let's say you are in a traditional waterfall mode and then you want to move agile, okay, which is the way to go nowadays, especially for mobile, where releases are of short cycles, and then you need to have an absolutely foolproof system to support those short release cycles. You'll need to go agile. so that you can address the customer's feedbacks then and there in small batches. Now, when you want to do small patches, you will be touching your code every now and then, probably once in 3 weeks. So you'll end up having to do a regression test once every 3 weeks. Now, you tell me if you want to do that manually every single time, or one time you want to automate it and keep on playing it all the time. So in mobile especially, that's when you need to automate. If you have a public-facing application, a customer-facing one that's going to live on your app store and then talk to the customers directly, then I think you're calling in for an automation strategy right from day one. Let's say your application is an internal application that has very limited audience, then probably you may not want to invest so much in automation right away, as in how the functionality gets heavy. Like in case of field sales, they use applications to collect data all the while, or to collect payment from customers. So in those cases, since it involves payments, as in how the functionality gets heavy, it will make sense to automate that. So
great. Yeah. And then getting back to that aspect of support, what we are seeing from Monique is currently in Xamarin, you cannot populate an accessibility ID in case of iOS and content description for the forms in case of Android. So the question is, would there be a support for this in the future?
Right now, we're really focused on making sure that Xamarin's integrated through all of our toolkits. So I guess from a Xamarin platform standpoint, allowing in Xamarin Studio or in Visual Studio to instantly upload those tests right from your IDE in Visual Studio or Xamarin Studio. That's been our focus right now. And in writing these tests in C#, bolstering that process, making it easier for non-developers to really write these test scripts, either in Ruby using Calabash or in Xamarin using C# or Visual Studio using C#. So right now, that's where we're focused on. I don't know. I'd say over the next few months, this year, probably not a focus for us. It might turn to be a focus for us in the coming years.
Sure. Thanks for that, Zach. There's a question coming from Melissa. Is the cost of Xamarin scalable in case I have to test on, say, 50 devices? That's the question Melissa wants to check with.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would think about Xamarin TestCloud in terms of device hours that you're going to be using. And in thinking about the 50 devices that you're going to have to test on, the alternative to those devices, or to testing those devices. The alternative is going out and purchasing all 50 devices, which already is a fixed cost that you don't want to incur. But on top of that, you're going to have to hire a few folks in order to maintain those devices, make sure that they're always charged, always ready to be tested on. On top of that, you need to make sure that they have the same or different operating systems, and just the maintenance in those 50 devices is pretty difficult to maintain. So using Xamarin TestCloud, we take all of those frictions away from you and make it very seamless to select the devices that you want to test on, when you want to test on them, and upload those using an automated framework. So the alternative, is going out and purchasing those devices yourselves. And there's some folks that can do that and can purchase and have a device lab. But for a lot of people that are getting into mobile testing and trying to figure out which devices to go purchase even to start, it's much easier to just use Xamarin TestCloud and start selecting your devices.
Great. That was very elaborate and insightful. I'm sure Monique could have attended to that. So looks like there's a question for you, Anant. So do you think testing on remote mobile devices is the same as physical device testing?
Yes, it absolutely is the same thing. As long as the remote device that we are talking about is not a simulator that's sitting on your desktop, and we are talking about a device that is in a data center which you are accessing remotely, yes, it is the same thing. Except for the convenience of testing, nothing else would change. The results would be the same thing, and the conditions you would test, in fact, would be elaborate in a remote device testing, since you can simulate a vehicle signal, or you can simulate 3G networks, and you can simulate a way more performance network conditions. But in physical device, you will not be able to do that right away on a physical device. So in a way, remote device testing has advantages over physical device testings.
Right. So at this point, let me take a pause here in terms of questions. So just for the benefit of the audience so far, if you have to summarize 3 key takeaways that you want to give for today's session, Anant, what would be those 3 from a mobile application testing in an agile environment standpoint?
First thing is, if you are not in agile, you have to move agile.
Okay.
As long as you're in mobile space, moving into Agile is the way to go to be able to address the customers. So that's number one, to be able to address your customers on the fly and give them an ongoing support. And that has to happen only through App Store, continuous monitoring of the App Store. So if you do not have a team that's constantly looking into your App Store reviews, your marketing pages, what people are talking about, your features and functionalities, as long as you don't do that, your app will not take you a long way. Second thing is, do not become too much design centric. Creating a beautiful design is good versus trying to create an extremely creative design that can kill the application is a roadblocker. So do not try to copy the design of others, and try to understand your customer, what they actually want to do with your application, and put those things first on screen or in the order of usage. Third thing is to plug in analytics to be able to know your customer. So if the companies have not invested in trying to know their customer through the application itself, they have to do that right away.
Wonderful. So the mantra is to stay agile, focus on user-centric design, and ensure you plug in analytics that the customer comes at the center of it.
That's exactly right.
Zach, if you have to summarize what Xamarin brings to the table, 3 key takeaways, what would you do that?
Sure, yeah, good question. So I'd say number one is physical devices. I can't emphasize that enough. If you're trying to test your application across emulators, the emulators just will not give you real-time feedback as to how your application is going to perform in the App Store. So testing across physical devices is crucial in your testing practice. The second thing would be test early and test often. So as you're going about your development, and Anant mentioned this in his talk, testing early and testing often is the way to go to make sure that you're testing your application at each step of the way, so that after 3 months of development, you're not looking back and saying, well, we could have just tested right away for this particular feature, but instead we now have to rewrite our entire application because we didn't test for that. And then finally, I'd say that manual testers are still very, very important, and our sort of co-founder of Xamarin TestCloud emphasizes this all the time, is that you're going to still need manual testers, but the whole point of a good manual tester is to not give your manual tester mundane, boring, repeatable work that you can be doing automatically. Instead, your manual testers should be given a few devices, be given a few applications, and try to break those applications through curiosity and actually enjoying the testing process. What manual testing has become today in the mobile world is, here, take 10 devices and test the application across all of these test steps, and take your entire day doing these very boring tasks. And that can be solved using Xamarin TestCloud, so that you don't need as many manual testers, let's say, and the manual testers that you do have will actually still enjoy their aspects of their job of being curious, trying to figure out how to break an application, as opposed to going through these test steps that you can just automate.
Great. I think the end point was the key. The game is all open for really cognitive and curious manual testers in the mobile world. With that said, on behalf of Gallop and Xamarin, I again want to thank a very enthusiastic audience who've been, very insightful in terms of the technical questions that came our way. I thank Anant and Zach for this session today. To all our audience, I'm very sure this was an informative session. The recording of this webinar will be shared in a day's time. If you have further questions, feel free to email us at marketing@gallup.net. And we at Gallup continue to engage in this exciting partnership with Xamarin, and we are at the forefront of mobile innovation to ensure mobile apps are better tested, leveraging Xamarin's TestCloud and Gallup's extremely strong mobile testing